His crimes were not quick or merciful. Kallinger revealed a chilling capacity for torture and sexual assault, inflicting prolonged suffering upon his victims before finally taking their lives. The scenes he left behind were not merely murders. They were elaborate, perverse theatrical productions of terror and domination. The brutality was designed to both fulfill his delusional directives and to maximize the torment of those he held captive. The randomness of his targets, ordinary families in their own homes, amplified the terror, making anyone feel vulnerable to his divine, yet demonic mission. The widespread fear he instilled was palpable, even if his name never quite achieved the notoriety of other infamous killers. The investigation into Kallinger's crimes was complicated by the sheer randomness of his attacks and the bizarre, deluded nature of his confessions. His arrest eventually led to a trial that laid bare the horrific details of his mental illness and the unspeakable acts he committed under its influence. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia by multiple experts, a critical factor in understanding the warped reality that drove his rampage. Despite his profound mental illness, he was deemed fit to stand trial and held accountable for his actions. Joseph Kallinger died in prison, succumbing to natural causes, his disturbing legacy a testament to the terrifying intersection of severe mental illness and unchecked violence. The finality of his incarceration offered a grim closure, but the raw brutality of his crimes continues to resonate, a stark reminder of the horrors that can fester within a mind convinced of a divine mandate for evil. From the chilling delusions of a man driven by a twisted divine mission, our grim narrative now transports us to a modern, technologically advanced nation grappling with a hidden darkness. We journey to Japan, to the late 1980s, where a different kind of monster emerged, one whose obsession with fantasy tragically bled into a horrifying reality. This was Tsutomu Miyazaki, a figure who would become known, with a shudder, as the Otaku Killer. His story is a disturbing blend of isolation, dark media consumption, and unimaginable cruelty. Miyazaki presented as a reclusive young man, deeply immersed in the world of anime, manga, and horror films. In Japanese culture, the term otaku often describes individuals with intense, sometimes obsessive, interests, particularly in pop culture. While not inherently negative, for Miyazaki, this intense immersion fostered a severe detachment from reality, fueling a dark fantasy life that eventually spiraled into murderous impulses. He struggled socially, finding solace and stimulation not in human connection, but in the simulated worlds of his media obsessions. This isolation, coupled with his burgeoning perverse interests, created a dangerous internal landscape. He harbored a deep-seated resentment and a desire for control, which he would horrifyingly manifest upon the most vulnerable members of society. Between 1988 and 1989, Miyazaki orchestrated a series of chilling abductions and murders that terrorized the Kanto region of Japan. He methodically targeted and kidnapped 4 little girls, all aged between 4 and 7 years old. His modus operandi was to approach them in his car, often offering candy or promising to take their photographs, exploiting their innocence and trust. Once abducted, he would take them to isolated locations where he subjected them to unspeakable acts of sexual abuse before murdering them. The horror did not end with their deaths. Miyazaki, driven by a grotesque impulse that seemed directly plucked from the darkest corners of the horror films he consumed, committed acts of profound desecration upon his victims' remains. His crimes gained international notoriety not just for their brutality, but for the chilling post-mortem acts he performed. Miyazaki cannibalized parts of his victims' remains, a truly repulsive act that underscored the depth of his psychosis. Even more disturbingly, in a twisted attempt to communicate with or further torment the victims' families, he mailed body parts, including bones and ashes, to them, accompanied by taunting letters. These macabre packages, filled with the horrifying remnants of their children, delivered a secondary wave of trauma and grief to the already devastated families. The discovery of these packages sent shockwaves through Japanese society, generating a widespread panic and profound public outrage. The investigation into the Otaku Killer was extensive, involving a massive police effort to track the elusive murderer whose crimes seemed so utterly senseless and barbaric. Miyazaki was eventually apprehended in July 1989, caught after attempting to kidnap another child, only to be chased by the girl's father. Once in custody, his apartment revealed the full extent of his horrifying obsession. Thousands of videotapes, many depicting grotesque horror and child pornography, along with trophies from his victims. His confession, delivered with a detached, almost theatrical air, detailed his atrocities with a chilling lack of remorse. Tsutomu Miyazaki was put on trial, a lengthy process that grappled with the nature of his mental state and the unspeakable reality of his crimes. He was found guilty of the murders and sentenced to death. After years of appeals, Tsutomu Miyazaki was executed in 2008, bringing a definitive end to the life of the Otaku Killer. His case profoundly impacted Japanese society, sparking national debates about media violence, child protection, and the psychological impact of social isolation, leaving a haunting legacy of profound evil that transcended the fictional horrors he once consumed. From the dark, isolated obsessions of a Japanese killer, our journey now turns to the searing heat of California, to a city that bore witness to a brief, yet utterly grotesque, rampage driven by extreme mental illness. This was the terrifying case of Richard Trenton Chase, a man whose bizarre compulsions earned him the chilling moniker, the Vampire of Sacramento. His story is a harrowing descent into paranoia, psychosis, and a macabre fascination with blood. Chase's life was a tragic trajectory of escalating mental deterioration. From a young age, he exhibited disturbing behaviors, including animal torture and bedwetting, classic early warning signs often associated with later violent tendencies. As he grew older, his mental state spiraled into severe psychoses. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and his mind became a battleground for terrifying delusions and rampant paranoia. He genuinely believed that his blood was turning to powder, a delusion that led him to try to replenish it by consuming the blood of animals. This bizarre belief intensified, evolving into a grotesque conviction that he needed to ingest fresh blood and organs to survive, fearing that otherwise his own heart would shrink and cease to function. This desperate, delusional quest for survival would eventually manifest in horrific ways. Driven by these deeply entrenched delusions, Chase embarked on a month-long killing spree in late 1977 and early 1978 that plunged Sacramento into a state of terror. His method was born directly from his twisted psychological needs. He would break into homes, targeting those he believed to be open, unlock doors or windows, a sign in his deluded mind that he was invited in. Once inside, he would commit unspeakable acts, driven by his bloodlust. He didn't just murder his victims. He engaged in horrifying post-mortem rituals. Richard Chase would drink his victims' blood, sometimes mixing it with milk or other beverages, genuinely believing it was essential for his survival. He also consumed their organs, acts of cannibalism fueled by his psychotic conviction that he was replenishing his own failing body. The scenes he left behind were unimaginably gruesome, marked by dismembered bodies and blood-soaked rooms, indicating a mind completely detached from reality and human empathy. In his brief, horrifying spree, Chase murdered 6 people. His victims included a pregnant woman whose body he mutilated, and a young child, demonstrating his indiscriminate brutality. The swiftness and extreme depravity of his crimes created widespread panic, leading residents to lock their doors and windows, fearful of the vampire who stalked their neighborhoods. The investigation was complex, initially baffled by the seemingly ritualistic nature of the murders. However, a series of clues, including fingerprints and a discarded blood-covered yogurt container near one of the crime scenes, eventually led detectives to Richard Chase. His arrest in January 1978 brought an end to the terror, but the full extent of his horrifying compulsions only became clear during his interrogation and subsequent trial. His deranged explanations for his actions laid bare the terrifying reality of his mental illness. Despite his severe psychosis, he was deemed competent to stand trial. Chase was convicted of his murders, and his gruesome story captivated and repulsed the public. The prospect of a lifetime in confinement, however, seemed to weigh heavily on his profoundly disturbed mind. In 1980, while awaiting execution, Richard Trenton Chase committed suicide in prison, ending the life of the Vampire of Sacramento. His death closed a dark chapter, but his legacy remains a stark, unsettling reminder of how unchecked mental illness can morph into a terrifying force, compelling an individual to commit acts of such extreme horror that they seem to belong to the realm of fiction rather than the grim reality of human crime. From the depths of delusional madness, we now turn our attention to a far more insidious form of evil. One cloaked in charm, disguised by normalcy, and chillingly showcased on national television. This was Rodney Alcala, a man who became notoriously known as the dating game killer. His story is a harrowing testament to how cunning manipulation and a veneer of charisma can allow a prolific predator to operate undetected, even in the public eye. Alcala presented himself as a budding photographer, an aspiring actor, and a seemingly eligible bachelor. He possessed a superficial charm, a certain ease in social interactions that belied the monstrous darkness within. He cultivated an image of normalcy, moving through various states like California, New York, and Washington, all while quietly committing unspeakable acts. His background, though not entirely without its early troubles, he had a prior conviction for assault, did not outwardly scream serial killer. It was this very ability to blend in, to project an approachable demeanor, that made him so exceptionally dangerous. In a shocking display of his audacity and chilling control, Rodney Alcala even appeared as a contestant on the popular television show, The Dating Game, in 1978, at the height of his active killing spree. On screen, he was a seemingly harmless, if eccentric, suitor. Off-screen, he was a ruthless hunter. Beneath the veneer of a struggling artist and a charming date lay a deeply twisted psychology. Alcala was a profoundly narcissistic and sadistic individual, driven by an insatiable desire for power and control over his victims. His fascination with photography was not merely an artistic pursuit. It was an integral part of his depravity. He used his camera as a tool of capture, a means of documenting his sadistic fantasies and the torment he inflicted. He didn't just kill. He reveled in the prolonged suffering of his victims, finding gratification in their terror and helplessness. His psychological profile pointed to an extreme personality disorder, completely devoid of empathy or remorse, capable of compartmentalizing his horrific actions from his public persona with terrifying ease. Alcala's modus operandi revolved around luring his victims under the guise of an artistic opportunity. He would approach young women and girls, often in public places like beaches or laundromats, offering to take their photographs, promising modeling opportunities, or simply flattering their appearance. This innocent-seeming invitation was his trap. Once he had them isolated, he would transform into a brutal assailant. Rodney Alcala tortured and murdered dozens of women and girls across multiple states. His crimes spanned over a decade, from the early 1970s into the late 1980s. The exact number of his victims remains a horrifying mystery, but investigators believe it stretches far beyond the confirmed cases. His crimes were characterized by extreme violence and prolonged suffering, meticulously inflicted for his own perverse gratification. The investigation into Alcala's crimes was prolonged and complex, spanning multiple jurisdictions and hindered by his transient nature and cunning ability to elude capture. His appearance on The Dating Game, while he was an active killer, became a chilling postscript to his story, highlighting the blind spots that predators can exploit. He was initially arrested and convicted for specific murders, but the true scope of his crimes began to unravel years later, primarily due to advancements in DNA evidence. Cold case detectives, revisiting old unsolved cases, found critical DNA links to Alcala, connecting him to murders that had long remained dormant. This led to a series of long legal battles, as he was repeatedly tried and convicted for murders across California and New York. Despite his continued attempts to delay justice through appeals and legal maneuvers, he was ultimately condemned for his heinous acts. The most haunting and disturbing legacy of Rodney Alcala's reign of terror was the discovery made after his final arrest. Investigators found a storage locker belonging to him containing over 1,000 photographs of unidentified women and girls. These weren't professional modeling shots. Many depicted young women in unsettling or sexually suggestive poses, some visibly distressed, while others were merely candid snapshots. The sheer volume of these images suggested a potential victim count far greater than the crimes for which he was ever convicted. Each photograph represented a potential life lost, a haunting face that might have been another victim of the charming, television-appearing killer. This collection stands as a grim archive of his dark obsessions, a chilling reminder of the unknown extent of his atrocities. Rodney Alcala spent the remainder of his life incarcerated, a fate he could not escape through his appeals or his deceptive charm. He died in prison in 2021 at the age of 77, taking the full truth about the faces in his chilling collection to his grave, leaving behind a terrifying question about how many more victims remain unknown. From the deceptive charm of a killer who walked among us and even appeared on our screens, we delve now into an even more unsettling realm, the quiet domesticity that masked unspeakable horror. This is the story of Robert Berdella, a man who, by day, ran a quaint curio shop, but by night, descended into a sadistic world that earned him the chilling moniker, the Butcher of Kansas City. His crimes were meticulously planned, brutally executed, and horrifyingly documented, revealing a level of calculated depravity that chills the mind. Robert Berdella's public persona was that of an eccentric but harmless shop owner. He operated Bob's Bizarre Bazaar, an antique and novelty shop in Kansas City, Missouri, filled with oddities and curiosities. To his customers and neighbors, he was an articulate, intelligent, and seemingly friendly individual. He was involved in his community, even helping to organize a local neighborhood watch program. A chilling irony given the monstrous activities unfolding behind the closed doors of his own home. There was nothing outwardly remarkable about him, nothing that would suggest the horrors he inflicted once his shop closed and the city slept. This seemingly mundane existence allowed him to operate for years, his victims vanishing without immediate suspicion, his house on a quiet street becoming a private chamber of horrors. Yet, beneath this ordinary exterior lurked a deeply complex and utterly twisted psychology. Berdella was not driven by delusions like some, nor by a simple urge for sexual gratification. His motivations were rooted in an extreme form of sadism and an insatiable lust for absolute dominance and control. He meticulously planned every aspect of his crimes, seeking to completely strip his victims of their will, their identity, and ultimately, their lives. His psychological landscape was one of absolute power, where the infliction of prolonged suffering and humiliation served as his ultimate gratification. While details of his upbringing suggest some early vulnerabilities and a strict, unyielding father figure, these elements alone do not fully explain the profound depths of his inherent psychological deviance. He seemed to possess a cold, calculating intellect entirely dedicated to the pursuit of torture. Berdella's modus operandi was to lure young men, often male prostitutes or vulnerable individuals, back to his unassuming Kansas City home. He would gain their trust, offering drugs, shelter, or companionship. Once inside, the pretense would vanish, replaced by terror. He would drug them into submission, then tie them to a bed, initiating a period of horrific, prolonged captivity and systematic torture that could last for days, or even weeks. His methods were designed for maximum suffering. Electrical shocks, various forms of mutilation, forced ingestions, and extreme physical and psychological torment. The most chilling aspect of Berdella's crimes was his methodical nature. He kept meticulous notes, detailed logs chronicling every step of the torture, the duration, the victim's reactions, and even his own perverse reflections. Alongside these chilling diaries, he took Polaroid photographs of his victims at various stages of their torment, capturing their suffering for his future revisitation. These documents served as a horrifying archive of his atrocities, an undeniable record of the 6 young men he subjected to this living hell before finally murdering them and dismembering their bodies for disposal. The investigation into Berdella's crimes did not begin with a missing persons report, but with a miraculous, harrowing escape. In April 1988, one of his victims, Christopher Bryson, managed to free himself from his binds, jump from a second-story window of Berdella's house, and run naked, still wearing a dog collar, to a neighbor's home for help. His incredible, terrifying testimony led police to raid Berdella's residence on Charlotte Street. What they discovered inside was beyond their worst nightmares. Not only the instruments of torture and bondage but also the indisputable evidence of his unspeakable acts, the handwritten torture logs, and the stacks of Polaroid photographs. This overwhelming and undeniable evidence led to Berdella's swift arrest. The discovery of the detailed logs and grotesque images provided an unprecedented glimpse into the mind of a serial torturer. Berdella's confessions were as chillingly detailed as his records, leaving no doubt about the extent of his depravity. He was charged with and pleaded guilty to 6 counts of murder, along with numerous charges of sodomy, assault, and felonious restraint. His plea agreement spared him a death sentence, consigning him instead to life imprisonment without parole. However, the finality of his incarceration was not the last chapter of his macabre story. In 1992, just 4 years into his life sentence, Robert Berdella died of a heart attack in prison. While the official cause was cardiac arrest, some speculated about foul play, though no evidence ever materialized. His death prevented him from ever facing further trials or revealing more victims, taking the full scope of his chilling experiments in human suffering to his grave. The meticulousness of his records, a testament to his calculated evil, remains a haunting reminder that some of the most horrifying acts are committed by those who appear utterly unremarkable, hidden behind a thin veil of normalcy. From the horrifying precision of a torturer who meticulously documented his crimes in a suburban home, we now venture into the vast, unforgiving wilderness of Alaska, where a mild-mannered baker transformed into a chilling hunter of human prey. This was Robert Hansen, known to the public by the deceptive moniker the Butcher Baker. His story is particularly unsettling because it juxtaposes an outwardly innocuous life with an unimaginable level of calculated, predatory violence against women. Hansen appeared to be an ordinary, upstanding citizen in Anchorage, Alaska. He owned a popular local bakery, a seemingly wholesome business that endeared him to the community. He was a married man, a father, and a skilled hunter. Nothing in his public demeanor suggested the monstrous desires festering beneath the surface. Yet, this facade concealed a deep-seated pathology, a history of sexual deviancy, and a violent misogyny that ultimately exploded into a horrifying spree of abductions and murders. His life as a baker provided him with an air of respectability, allowing him to interact with unsuspecting individuals in a seemingly benign capacity, masking his true predatory intentions. Hansen's twisted psychology was driven by a need for dominance and a perverse fusion of his hunting hobby with sexual sadism. His modus operandi was unique and chillingly theatrical. He would frequent strip clubs and bars in Anchorage, targeting vulnerable women, often dancers or sex workers. He would charm them, offer money or a ride, and once he had them isolated, he would force them at gunpoint into his private plane. This small aircraft became his mobile chamber of horror, flying his victims into the desolate, unforgiving Alaskan wilderness. There, in the remote, isolated landscape, he would engage in his ultimate perversion. He would release them from the plane, often naked or sparsely clothed, and then hunt them with a rifle, treating them as if they were game animals. This horrific sport, a literal hunt for human beings, fulfilled his deepest, darkest fantasies of power and control. Over the course of a decade, between 1971 and 1983, Robert Hansen terrorized Alaska. He eventually confessed to 17 murders, though investigators suspected the true number could be higher. The cases were notoriously difficult to solve due to the remote locations where he disposed of bodies, often burying them in shallow graves in the wilderness. However, Hansen's reign of terror finally came to an end due to the incredible bravery of one of his victims, Cindy Paulson. She managed to escape and reported him to the police. Her detailed account, coupled with the persistence of dedicated investigators, eventually led to a search of Hansen's property. The evidence found, a map marking burial sites and trophies from his victims, was undeniable. Hansen eventually confessed, leading authorities to some of the grave sites. He was sentenced to 461 years in prison. Robert Hansen died in prison in 2014, a haunting reminder of the predator who hid behind the facade of the friendly neighborhood baker, transforming the Alaskan wilderness into his personal hunting ground. From the isolated terror of Alaskan forests, we shift our focus to the cold, oppressive climate of the Soviet Union, where fear and paranoia were already pervasive, providing fertile ground for a monster to operate in the shadows. This was Andrei Chikatilo, a man whose grotesque appetite for violence earned him the infamous title, the Butcher of Rostov. His crimes were particularly chilling because they targeted the most vulnerable members of Soviet society, and his ability to evade capture for so long exposed deep flaws within a system that prided itself on control and order. Chikatilo lived a seemingly unremarkable life as a schoolteacher and supply clerk, a bland facade that masked an unspeakable inner world. He was a married man with children, a seemingly normal citizen in a highly surveilled state. Yet, beneath this veneer of conformity, a monstrous sexual sadism festered. His targets were diverse in age but consistent in their vulnerability. Primarily women and children, whom he would lure with promises of candy, a job, or simply by exploiting their trust in adults. He often stalked bus stops, train stations, and remote forest paths, seeking out unsuspecting individuals. His methods were unspeakably brutal. After luring his victims to secluded locations, he would commit horrific acts of sexual assault, mutilation, and murder, often using knives. The secrecy of the Soviet system, coupled with bureaucratic incompetence and a reluctance to admit to the existence of serial killers, inadvertently provided him with an extended period of operational freedom. Between 1978 and 1990, Andrei Chikatilo committed at least 52 murders. This horrifying tally made him one of the most prolific and feared serial killers in Soviet history. As the body count grew, and the gruesome similarities between the cases became undeniable, authorities were finally forced to acknowledge the presence of a single, monstrous perpetrator. Chikatilo was finally apprehended in November 1990, and after a prolonged period of interrogation, he confessed to his crimes. His trial, which began in 1992, became a sensational public spectacle. The Butcher of Rostov was convicted of 52 murders. In 1994, Andrei Chikatilo was executed, ending the life of a man whose brutal acts had shattered the illusion of safety and exposed the monstrous capacity for evil hidden within seemingly ordinary individuals. Finally, we arrive at a figure whose confirmed victim count stands as perhaps the most staggering in modern history, a haunting testament to exploitation and unchecked evil. This is the story of Pedro López, a man whose grotesque confessions earned him the terrifying designation, the Monster of the Andes. His tale is not only one of unimaginable scale but also a chilling indictment of legal loopholes and systemic failures that allowed a mass murderer to potentially walk free. López emerged from a background steeped in poverty and abuse in South America, experiences that shaped a profoundly disturbed individual with a predatory focus. He roamed across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, exploiting the extreme vulnerability of young girls in impoverished regions. His modus operandi was simple, yet horrifically effective. He would target young girls, often from indigenous communities or street children, luring them with false promises of money, candy, or toys. Their desperate circumstances made them easy prey. Once he had gained their trust and lured them to secluded locations, he would commit acts of sexual assault and murder, burying their bodies in shallow, unmarked graves. His reign of terror spanned years, with countless families mourning missing daughters. Pedro López was finally apprehended in Ecuador in 1980. What followed was a confession that shocked the world and redefined the scale of serial murder. With chilling composure, López confessed to murdering over 300 girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. He even led investigators to numerous grave sites, allowing them to unearth the remains of dozens of his victims, tragically confirming the vast scope of his atrocities. He provided details that allowed police to recover 53 bodies from a mass grave in Ecuador, and his claims of hundreds more across the region were substantiated by investigators. Despite the horrifying magnitude of his crimes, López's fate became a stark example of a deeply flawed justice system. In Ecuador, due to sentencing laws that capped prison terms, he was sentenced to a mere 16 years in prison for 110 murders. Even more controversially, in 1994, after serving just 14 years, he was released from prison due to legal technicalities and declared sane. He was then deported to Colombia, where he was briefly institutionalized before vanishing. The last confirmed sighting of Pedro López was in 1999. His whereabouts are unknown to this day, leaving open the terrifying possibility that the monster of the Andes, the man who confessed to murdering over 300 innocent girls, could still be alive and free. This chilling collection of stories serves as a potent, heavy reminder that true monsters do not always conform to our preconceived notions. They are not mythical creatures lurking in the shadows of folklore, but human beings who breathe the same air, walk the same paths, and seamlessly blend into society. They can be the mild-mannered baker, the unassuming laborer, the trusted friend, or the seemingly innocuous beggar. They hide in plain sight, their dark intentions concealed behind a veneer of normalcy, preying on the most vulnerable among us. My mission, in recounting these grim histories, is clear: to expose them so they are never forgotten. The victims, whose lives were brutally cut short, deserve to have their stories told, their memory honored. Their pain, their terror, must not simply fade into the annals of forgotten statistics. By bringing these narratives to light, we not only pay tribute to those who suffered, but we also arm ourselves with knowledge. We are urged to stay alert, to recognize that the greatest threats often come from the most unexpected places. The chilling question always remains: how well do we truly know those around us? This is a plea, a stark imperative, for you to remain vigilant, to trust your instincts, and to honor the victims by remembering their stories, ensuring that the shadows of evil, even when cast by seemingly ordinary people, are never truly allowed to consume the light of remembrance. The vigilance of memory is our greatest defense against the monsters who walk among us.
Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more.